Vecna. I think we can all agree that the attic scenes with him were incredible, especially in terms of VFX. With the final season of Stranger Things getting closer, I'm getting more and more excited, which you might notice if you check my Instagram. That's why I decided to recreate a scene from season 4 that's been stuck in my head ever since I first saw it in 2022. Today, I'm going to recreate this scene. I started by analyzing the attic, which was interesting. Once I had a clear version, I began modeling the structure as a single piece. I added a plane and extruded it into the main shape. Then I extruded 3 walls from the sides and scaled them to match the original form. In the background, you can only see 3 windows and a straight wall with a sloping roof starting in the middle. For everything that isn't visible, I just closed the mesh so no light passes through. Next, I added the windows where the light beams will shine through. For the cutouts, I used a cube with a Boolean modifier. After that, I added wooden beams and other details like walls and planks. To finish, I added rafters along all the sides by scaling a cube into shape and using an array modifier, so I didn't have to duplicate it 40 times manually. Back to the windows. I added window frames by using a cube and cutting out the inside. Then I placed wooden planks behind the windows, again just by scaling a cube. As extra detail, I added a few planks on top of certain areas. And that's it for the main part of the attic. At least that's all I could see in the reference images. After that, I started adding extra details, especially on the sides. Since it was hard to make out everything in the references, I just placed objects that looked fitting, a small boat on the right side and some boxes and chairs on the other. But of course, important details like Henry's box with his candles and books are in the same place. Not to forget, I also added a bevel to the wooden beams and planks for more accuracy. Since the attic was almost finished, I moved on to Vecna's vines. I started with a stretched cylinder, went into edit mode, and added several loop cuts. Then I applied a displacement modifier and tweaked the settings to make it look more organic. For the material, I used a simple setup, a mixed color node with dark red and blue driven by a noise node. I combined normal and albedo textures through a bump node for the surface detail and added a clear coat to give it a wet look. It's a simple material setup, but since there are no close-ups, it works well enough. The last step was rigging the vine. I created a simple bendy bone rig and parented the mesh to it. If you want to learn more about rigging, check out my last video. With that, the vines were finished and ready for animation. But we need something to attach the vines to, so let's move on to Vecna. I didn't model him myself, I'm not a character artist, so I downloaded a free model, credit to the creator, link in the description. I reworked the model a bit, scaled up the texture resolution, created a quick subsurface scattering texture, improved the normals by combining albedo and normal maps, and added a clear coat. Oh, and I also added a subdivision modifier to make him look less chunky. I don't know why, but the rig that came with him was completely messed up. You had to select 4 different bones just to move one arm, haha. Since I only needed a small animation, it would have been unnecessary to fix it, so I just worked through the pain. I animated his arms and head to move up slightly, just enough to give him a bit of motion and make it look natural. With Vecna animated and floating, I brought in the vines I made earlier. One end I attached to random spots in the front, sides, or background, and the other end to Vecna. Then I keyframed them so they stayed connected. I repeated this process until I got the look I wanted. Now for the texturing. For the whole attic, I used a single material from Quixel, but I tweaked it by mixing in a darker color with a noise node as the factor. I also applied it to the wooden beams, rafters, and planks. The only manual work was UV unwrapping a few individual parts. Since the attic, Vecna, and his vines were the only parts that needed texture work, the next step was lighting, probably the most important part. I really had to analyze the original. I added a strong light from the left side, several fill lights on the right, a stronger light from above in the right corner, plus some fill lights in the foreground, with one of them set a bit stronger. With the lighting done, I still needed some atmosphere. I created a big cube and gave it a simple shading setup. A big part of the mood also comes from the white particles. For those, I built a geometry setup that uses noise for random positioning and added a controller for the particle size. The last step was adding vines all over the attic. For the walls, I used a vine generator where you simply draw and it creates the vines automatically. I followed the tutorial from a video, link in the description. So I just drew lines all over the attic and that gave me the wall vines. For the floor, I drew a few lines and added some depth. If they intersected with objects, I simply fixed it. And with that, everything was ready for rendering. And now, 6 hours later, with a 10-second sequence weighing in at 400 gigabits, which is insane, we're in Nuke for compositing. Many of you requested a deeper look into Nuke, so I'll explain exactly what I did. First, I combined all the render passes. Right away, I adjusted Vecna's colors with crypto mats and boosted the volume using a grade node. Then, I did some relighting with a UV-based node. Not the proper way, but it works. Basically, you click the area where you want light, use that as a mask, and feed it into a grade node. After that, I added volume rays. For this, I created a mask showing only the windows and used it as the light source for the volume ray node. I also made a second mask, so the rays stay behind objects instead of shining flat across the scene. Next, I added motion blur and smoke to improve the atmosphere. The smoke was masked in a similar way to the volume rays, so it stays behind the wooden beams. Then I placed a sky background behind the windows. After that came a lot of cryptomata grading, darkening certain parts like Vecna, his vines, and objects at the sides. Finally, I added halation and several camera effects. Anamorphic distortion, chromatic aberration, lens distortion, film grain, and some extra glows on specific areas. With that done, it was time to render again. And that's it. Let's take a look at my version. I'm pretty happy with the result, but let me know what you think. If you have any questions about specific parts, drop them in the comments or reach out on Instagram. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you soon.